Can't hear you. Can't
All
hear
right.
you.
Now you
There
can.
you are.
All right.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Flawless.
Where's Christian?
Oh, he's over here too. Right there. I tell you what I might do here is is stop this stream and start it right back up, just so all that first part I can just delete.
Yeah.
You think we're in jeopardy of losing all this if we do it, or just go with it?
I say just roll.
I can cut that off later. Actually, I know how to edit. All right, hey guys. Once
Howdy.
again, Wes and Chris, thank you very much. Christian. Sorry, I've had family and things were going on over here, and I did good to get this done like I am. Chapter
It's all
11.
gravy.
This is where we are. I like this chapter. There's a couple things I like about this chapter. One, it was shorter, so it's going to work better for tonight. And it's just good information. So I thought it was pretty good. And I'll start where we usually start, which is how he begins. Again, this is Joel Beeke's book. We're not reading it. It's just parenting by God's promises. And have some people at church that have the book. I encourage you, get the book. And if you'd like to, just listen in on the discussion, you can even comment on discussions if you are on YouTube or Facebook. And we'll, obviously we do this later and we stream it like a podcast too. He starts off with Mark 16, verses 6 through 8. This is page 123 of his book. And this is the word of the Lord. He says, "And the angel saith unto them, Be not affrighted." So he doesn't use the King James in the rest of it, but he does it at the beginning. I like that. "Be not affrighted. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, which was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. Behold, the place where they laid him. But go your way. Tell his disciples and Peter that he goeth before you into Galilee. There shall ye see him. And he said unto them, and they went out quickly, as he said unto them." Let's try that again. "There shall ye see him, as he said unto you. And they went out quickly and fled from the sepulchre, for they trembled and were amazed. Neither said they anything to any man, for they were afraid." Yeah, the King James can be difficult to read at times. Although I gotta say that was probably on me and not Mr. King. So the main thing he's saying right here is we are to care for our children with hearts of compassion. And that seemed to be sort of the theme of the chapter, really, is that as you're dealing with your children, you need to sympathize with your children. And he just says at the very beginning, our calling as parent priest, and this is the part where he's talking about, the priestly office we have with our children, is not only to pray for our children, because he talked about that last time. We are to care for them with hearts of compassion. So being compassionate, it's kind of the feeling somebody else's pain, understanding, having living with your spouse in an understanding way, as the Bible says, but also living with your children in an understanding way. At the bottom of this page, he says, "Of course, we should not sympathize with our children in ways that weaken them or reinforce anything negative in them. For example, we should not feel so sorry for our children that we give them excuses to feel sorry for themselves." So, he's talking about how do we strengthen our children? How are you supposed to be an encouragement to them, really? And I like the word encourage because it really means like to strengthen them too. So, did you guys have any opening thoughts on this particular chapter, or even the first opening pages or anything?
I do. I like it as a whole. Once we get a little further in, I do have some things that I'm gonna maybe offer a little pushback. But in general, like the whole principle of the thing, I'm totally on board with. And I find myself, for me, with our kids, it's easy for me to have sympathy with the ones that I see myself in, but it is more difficult when I'm dealing with one of the kids that, it's not, I'm like, who are you? What are you? I have no frame of reference for your attitudes and actions right now. I just want to, lay down the law or be done with this. And so, but that's dangerous because you can be too sympathetic to the point of being hurtful.
Wes, any opening salvos from you?
I thought it was kind of an interesting passage to start this chapter with. Like I found a lot of connections with the story of Peter, but I had to kind of stop and ponder why we started with this passage. And what's your take on that? I mean, I guess it's that showing that Christ, post resurrection, was still taking care of his children, as the angel starts and says, "Do not be affrighted." So he made sure that even then he was sympathizing with his children, saying, "Hey, meet me here." But it's, I thought it was an interesting way. Is that kind of how you taught? Is that kind of what his frame was? And
Well, when I read it at first, I was the same way. I was like, okay, because what tends to happen with the verses he uses at the beginning of a chapter is, oh, I didn't see that. I was waiting for that moment. But I think just because I've seen it before, I think it's the and Peter. Because what he seems to be happening is, Peter's blown it. Peter's denied him with cursings. He's just after, and also he talks about how Peter, it was a leader, but he began to trust in his own leadership, and he's like his own strength.
Okay.
They've all denied you, I'll never deny you. And he's like, man, I don't think Jesus said man, unless he was using it better than I did. He said, you're going to deny me 3 times before the rooster crows. And then, we'll get into it a little bit later, is the nonverbal confrontation between Jesus and Peter, which I think is pivotal, because you aren't given anything other than he made eye contact with him, and then Peter is convicted in some way and leaves. And so we'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, I think it's the idea of Peter's restoration, so that Jesus, as our high priest who sympathizes with us, and sympathize with Peter, so even Peter's being called back, because Peter could probably easily see himself as he's blown it so bad he's not. I can't even call myself an apostle. And so I think Christian, what do you think? What's your tea tonight, by the way?
It's a decaf English breakfast tea.
All right, it's nice. So I said it.
Good. That's exactly what I was going to say. Is the connection is that he singles out Peter, and then the whole thing is about how Peter is treated by Jesus, and then there's this restoration, and how we need to treat our kids that way.
Mm-hmm. And and I guess maybe I was going to say everybody else too, but we don't have that sort of authority over everybody else. It's real easy to treat your children so much more harshly than you would ever treat anybody else. I know.
Oh, yeah.
And then I know how bad that can, sometimes you just go, well, they had that one coming, and sometimes it's just like, but it's so, for me, it's difficult when you have a child who's repeating the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. It's like, how many times do I have to tell you? How many times do I have to tell you? You're doing this on purpose. What are you, so, and I get kind of taking the chapter as a whole. He does talk about that at one point, about the way to reprimand a child that is done. I can't remember what page it was, but he used the word, it's like privately. Let's see, I wrote under it. Yeah, he says it should be, it's on page 128 above the little thing where it says Peter placed last. He says, from time to time, it may be necessary to admonish a child and reinforce the call to repentance. Because he's talking about, you don't just keep hammering away on somebody for something. You got to be, you finally just, a lot of it is just sports analogies too. If you're trying to learn a sport, and if you just keep, like Wes is almost as good of a table tennis player as I am, even though he has defeated me every time we played. But it's just weird how that works. But if somebody else comes up to play and we're like just slamming, every time they hit the ball, it's like they're never going to learn. And if you see they're doing something wrong and you just continue to say, you're not holding it right, you're not holding it right, they'll never enjoy the game. Like you have to learn to enjoy a game when you're really bad at it. And you've got to play with somebody, no matter what your level is, you need to participate at some level where they're able to participate and enjoy the game. The point of the game is that we have fun playing it. If I am an expert, like I've played tennis with expert tennis players before, and I didn't know they were that good. until I watched them play. And they were just, because they came down to my level. And if they hadn't have, I'd have been like, stop hitting me with the ball. You're evil. And I've done it again. So I think it's, if the analogy holds, your children are learning, they're being we're all in the process of sanctification. And so if Jesus were to deal with us as our sin deserves, who could stand? So if we're dealing with our children as their sin deserves, they can't stand. And then who are we, I think, as a part of it, to be dealing with our children as their sin deserves? But we should deal with them as their sin is they need, for the point of helping them. And I think it says in there, so what he says is, from time to time it may be necessary to admonish a child and reinforce the call to repentance. But when we do, we should make that reminder personal, private, loving, warm, and convicting. And I kind of wrote under it, like, what are the opposites? And personal and private seem to kind of say the same thing. So I said they should not be public, hateful, cold, and I was trying to, like, what's the opposite of convicting? I guess maybe just harassing. Just I've seen, like, I worked at Walmart years ago after Hurricane Hugo in 1988 or something like that, and it was a Hurricane Hugo. What was it? Doesn't matter. The recovery effort, it's a recovery team. But I was working I was in college working in Walmart, and I would see a lot of parenting that took place. And the best parenting is the ones you didn't notice happening, but there are other people just yelling at their kids, snatching at their kids, just being. It's like, man, stop it with these kids. And then I got kids, and I'm like, yeah, okay, I shouldn't have been quite so judgmental. It's kind of hard. But at the same time, it's like, try to learn. It's like, you don't need to do that in public. Is there a way to go, wait a second, I need to, how do I talk to you about your behavior? Because I think a lot of times the problem is that children are not, if they're in a situation where their behavior is terrible in public or something, then you need, help needs to happen. I mean, there has to be, maybe somebody can come along beside you and help you figure out, how do I deal with, my kids are having particular problems. But just in general, ordinary life, as we deal with our children who can be over the top, just like we can sometimes, embarrassing them in public isn't very helpful. And it's kind of a thing to remember. So no pushback on that. So
I just
going ahead.
Like, there is this moment, the reality. I mean, I agree. Like, we always try to remove our kids from the situation and do whatever we need to do discipline wise in private. But sometimes when a kid is losing their mind, like, you are not going to sit down and have this, like, theological discussion about the love of Jesus with them. It's not going to happen. You cannot reason with a 4-year-old who's losing their mind. Well, tell me about your feelings. Don't you know this isn't the right? And we need to be very, very clear that this has got to stop, and then we'll talk about
it. Right.
And
well, let's talk about this for a second, okay? Because that's exactly where I am, okay? Right. So put me in that exact situation. My face is getting red. Like, by this point, when we're full blown breakdown, I'm mad.
Yeah.
And so what I'm working on, right? So it's like, I'm trying not to discipline in that state of mind any longer, right? I'm trying to work on that. However, if you give a 4-year-old 45 minutes, well, they've already moved on to 3 other offenses by then, So it's difficult. So what is the correct thing in that instance?
Well, I think, like, and this is something I have to be reminded of, because my tendency is toward, sometimes is to, want to put it off or want to be soft, or think that because I'm angry at this situation or this child for pitching a fit, that I'm, like, sinning. But that's not. You certainly can sin in your anger, but anger is not in and of itself sinful. And I always try to look at the character of God and how he deals with his children, and it's not always this sort of gentle shepherd. Sometimes he whacks them in the head with and sticks the crook around their neck to get them out of out of danger. And but Wes, like, trying to find that balance and making sure this is godly, like righteous
Discipline.
frustration and righteous discipline versus just me and my flesh. Like, that's where it gets hard.
I think he actually maybe gets into this, when he starts talking about the look Jesus gave Peter. I think he actually does.
Well, yeah, and then the next chapter too, I think, is more he starts talking about actual discipline.
Yeah, true.
But there was a book, I wish I could remember the name of it, but it was written by Kevin Leman, and there's another guy that's a Leman, that's one of the 9 Marks guys, but I don't think they're related. But this guy, he wrote a book, How to Make Your Children Mind Without Losing Yours. That was the name of it. How to Make Your Children Mind. And it had lots of cool stuff. It was years ago since I've read it, but it was helpful to us when we were parenting small children. He just had these certain little pithy little things. And I don't know, overall, I'm not going to condone the book because I'd have to read it again. But it was, one of the things was your kid's having a meltdown in the mall. This was back when people go to malls. Kid's having a meltdown in the mall. He's like laying down on the floor, kicking his feet. He's like, just step over the child. You're going to want to step on the child. Step over the child and just keep going. Keep an eye on him. But he thinks he's being abandoned. And he says, once he has this understanding that I'm being abandoned, it's like, don't give in to what they're trying to do here. And so it was just things like that. He had lots of good practical things. But I think that I remember and one of the things was we were going into grocery stores when Ian and Chandler were little. They were terrible. They were absolutely terrible. And I just remember one of the things, and it may have been from him, but it was this advice you heard was to say to them before you go into the grocery store, is just look them in the eye and go, listen, I just want to tell you guys how proud I am of you when we go into a grocery store and you just behave so well. It makes me feel good. You look like you're something. You just pump them up about how good they are when they're in grocery stores, and then it seems to work a little bit sometimes. And I remember thinking, I'll be so glad when I can get them out of these car seats, so I don't have to carry them around everywhere I go. And then when they got out of the car seats, I was like, I'd pay anything to be able to strap their butts back down in car seats, so I don't have to chase them everywhere. So. And still, we have grandkids, living with us. And I've got the one, I won't name his name, Christian, but he has the same name as you. And, oh my gosh! And Bill Cosby, you can't talk about him anymore either. But he had a good line that said, "Don't let a kid." You know what it means for somebody to get you goat?
Yeah.
Wes, is that something?
I'm not familiar with that.
Generational thing. If somebody gets your goat, it means they've gotten under your skin. You know what that means? They've gotten under your skin and they got you. He says, so they'd say, like, somebody's got your goat. And he said, the best way for somebody to get your goat is for you to let them know where you've tied it. And so it's like kids a lot of times are doing things that they figured out to do that works. But sometimes they're like, their brains aren't working right yet. I mean, like you said, you can't reason with them, but you have to control them in some way. So you've got to figure out a way. I just think you need to prepare yourself mentally as you're about to go into this situation. You're going into war. I got to suit up. I'm going to stand post. I'm going to have a conversation. We're going to have a plan. And it may be, this is unacceptable behavior and we're going to go. I don't know. I mean, you got to kind of figure it out. But and then when you talk about how angry you get, and I talk about how angry I get, I'll say cutting things. That's my attack. And I got to be careful because my friends, that's the way I grew up, so you can't, sarcasm is not the best form of love, which I grew up thinking.
Oh, that's hurt. That's hurt.
Phrase. My friend said that we tease because we love. That was one of the things. But I think, I don't know. Kids are hard. Little kids are hard. Jude is awesome.
Kevin makes a valid point, though. I
had a chance to read it as I was.
Very,
put it up here.
That's biblical.
All right. I haven't read it. I'm going to take your word for it and pop it up here. It says,
canceled.
Do you know Kevin? Do you know who Kevin is? Do you know who Kevin is? Okay, yeah, he's a good guy. He works at the Taylor House where my mama is. Okay,
Oh,
God
nice.
actually built the body with a nerve that starts in the brain and ends in the bottom, and can be activated to reset the behavior with a well placed smoting to the
Smoting.
rear end. It's called the vagus nerve.
A smote to ruin.
I think he's feeling. Yeah, and he's got some medical training, so he knows what he's talking about.
That's
Um,
valid.
it is valid. So yeah, another one of the things that Kevin Lehman talked about was spanking as well, and I have
He
found
tried to
that
get us kicked off the internet.
well, okay, so Ian and Chandler again. So Ian was born first. So I've told you guys this, I'm sure. I don't know what Ian had done, but it had to be something awful for me to get to the point where I'm like, I'm gonna have to spank you, man. This is happening. And I spanked him, and he was real little. He looked at me like 3 or 4. I don't know. He looked at me, and he's as if to say, I did not understand this could happen. It'll never happen again. You'll never have more trouble with me. I was like, this is awesome. Chandler, I mean, I could have taken a baseball bat to the boy, and he'd just be like, "Come at me, come at me." It's like it's not working.
Like
It was
Rocky.
not going to work with him. And so but he could not stand to be ignored. He could not stand to be in a timeout. He could not stand. There were just certain things you just had to find out where they've tied their goats, and figure it out. And just sometimes. But the good news is, man, they're 4. You're so much bigger than they are. You can pick them up and carry them out and say but a blocked goal is an aggravating thing. You're planning to do something and they're stopping it. It's like playing against Kareem Abdul-Jabbar at basketball, and he keeps slamming that ball in your face, and you're just like, I can defeat you. I will do this. But I don't know. There, we solved your problem with that, Wes.
Yeah, thank you.
Just
Yeah,
or
Appreciate
just
it.
highlighted it.
you do
We all have
parenting
it.
good. You don't, and they talk about this too. He talks about this on page 125. He says, right, kind of in the middle paragraph. Anyway, he says we should have realistic expectations of our children while still holding them to a high standard. And so that's good. You got to make sure you're having 4-year-old expectations, but it needs to be a high 4-year-old expectation. I'm still holding you to a high standard. He said every parent is prone to err on one side of that balance. So, all right, he says, we should also exercise priestly sympathy without excusing sin, which is a delicate balance. Every parent is prone to err on one side of that balance. Often, one parent tends to err on the side of being overly severe, and the other parent on the side of being too lenient. And I mean, I don't know if I've ever met parents who, maybe the ones that are, it's like a toupee. Like toupee, you always can tell when somebody's wearing a toupee, right? Or can you? Maybe it's just a bad
I
toupee.
can't wait to hear this
I've
illustration.
seen some good toupees.
All right, see there,
Yeah,
so you just
yeah.
don't notice it. So I was going to say I've never seen parents who one's like this and the other's so far on the other side, and but maybe you just don't notice it. I know you and Andrea seem to be. She just said the dream team. She put a little comment in there.
I don't know who I don't know if she's talking about us.
Yeah, she's
I
on the
don't
wrong
know.
page. But so here's my example of
Kareem
this.
Abdul-Jabbar.
So I had Taekwondo school, so teaching Taekwondo, and the parents, I had things set up where they could watch, but they could watch without really being seen or without communicating with their children. So it was a good setup, and so they were watching, and this one lady went home and told her husband that I was terrible with these kids, that I was the most authoritarian, harsh person with these children, and that he needs to come in and say something to me. And he's like, oh, I'll say something. And so he comes and he's watching the class. I didn't know anything about this. I'm teaching the class as normal. He comes up to me afterwards. And he said, John, I got to talk to you. I said, yeah. He said, my wife sent me down here, said how rough you are and you're too hard on these kids and everything. I said, okay. He said, she sent me down here to talk to you about it. I said, okay. He said, you're not strict enough, man. You let way too much go. I don't know what she's talking about. You just need to be. And that was like, it really helped me to see something, because it's hard. Parents will be very critiquing of how you are with their children. But I saw it's like 2 different parents that watched me, and they had these 2 different perspectives. And it really is. There is a balance. And so on the application to take class, one of the things that parents would fill out an application, and I would put on there, what is it specifically that you want your child to learn by taking this class? And I mean, I've had hundreds of students over the years, and with the exception of maybe 2 or 3, every single one. Do you have a guess what they wrote on there about what they wanted their children to learn?
Self-discipline.
Self-discipline and self-control.
Close
But
with the enemy and
but you know
destroy
what
them.
they did not like? They did not like to see their children disciplined.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, there's the problem. If you don't disciple your children in some way, where do you think self-discipline comes from? I'm like, I can't. You're sending children to me who can't discipline themselves, and you want me to not discipline them either. You're just going to have undisciplined children. So you have to discipline your children. But I think what he's getting at in this chapter is, but man, you got to be sympathetic with them. They're just kids, and they're trying to do their best. And he says this one thing. What's that one? He says, Thomas Watson, the Puritan writer, says, a father is a mirror, which the child often dresses himself by. Let the glass be clean and not spotted. So you're also training your children in how to deal with. I mean, it's all convicting. I mean, God gives you children just to humble you. I mean, there's so, and I mean, and I'll stop talking a minute and let you guys go. But I've said this too much too. But we had our kids and we were empty nesters, and then we started looking back and we're like, man, all the errors we made, everything we did wrong. And then we're thinking, watching other people with their kids, and we're like, it was so much easier. Why can't you do this? Why can't you do that? And then we had grandkids that we're raising, and it's like, oh yeah, we forgot how hard this was. I mean, it's a lot harder. The good news is when you get past this, you're going to forget about how hard it was. You're just going to remember how terrible you were at it. And that's all you remember. And then, but you got to remember, it's like, it's hard in the midst of it. And so you need people praying for you and with you. And that's why I think family worship is important. At the end of the day, it's like you can say, even though you don't take your 4-year-old 2 hours later and say, hey, I'm going to have to spank you now because you did something. Like, you've got to connect. The time has to be there. But I do think if you're doing family worship, you could say something like, hey, your behavior at the store today, that got out of control. It even made me angry. But guess whose fault it was for me getting angry? That is me. I shouldn't have I would love to have handled it like this. And then you can confess and you pray about it and say, but we need to, but you just, I think the main thing about disciplining your kids is you have to love your children, and you have to love them enough to make sure you're trying to train them for society so they don't add to the chaos. And Kevin asks, he says, is sympathy consistent with justice? Can you extend grace? Can you extend grace without sympathy? I guess it would be possible. I'd have to think about that last one. But sympathy consistent with justice. Oh, yeah, I don't want to be unjust with my child. But, grace triumphs over judgment too. So there are times when it's okay to ignore an offense. You just, as a parent, you have to be able to make sure your parenting is the main thing. But you can't let, my concern is that a lot of times parents feel judged by their children's behavior. And so they're more concerned about how they look when their kids misbehave than they're worried about how do I train my child to behave. Does that make sense? So, if I'm going to discipline my child, it's got to be for their good. And if I'm disciplining their children because they're angering me and they need to stop, I need to make sure I do that with some self-control too, though.
Sorry, I'm just chewing on the question.
This is a good question. I like the way you said it.
Is sympathy consistent with justice? I mean, it's justice does not exclude sympathy. I'm not sure the two are mutually exclusive. I'm thinking in the context of a judge. A judge can extend justice and not be sympathetic to
the situation.
Right.
But when
God is not that way, and that's where he finishes It's at the end of the chapter, but he finishes with that verse from Hebrews.
Well, what if God is sympathetic in his final judgment, but there's nothing to be sympathetic about? There is no excuse. You are without excuse. I mean, in the final judgment.
Right.
I mean, there's no leniency. There's no mercy. There's no grace, because it's only there because Jesus Christ has absorbed the blow. So if we're going to extend sympathy to somebody over justice, it's only because of the grace of God that we're able to do it, and even to try to help somebody understand more about grace and mercy and sympathy. But yeah, I mean, so justice is just a huge, big, loaded word too. I don't think God, Kevin says, I don't think God ever said he was sympathetic. However, he was compassionate. Well, sympathetic. So sympathy and compassion is one Greek and one Latin or something like that. You know, to sympath and compassion. I think sympathy can imply to us, I don't know. I think there's similar words. I think when God has compassion on somebody, it means he feels their pain with them. Yeah.
Well, that's why I was Hebrews 4:14. Well, 15 really. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. That's what I was drawing on. Really, as I was reading the whole chapter, like this is a unique aspect of Christ, of the incarnation, something that came along as a result of the incarnation.
Kevin said, I am corrected.
Well, I know what. I'm loving these questions, because I'm sitting here thinking I normally don't plow this deep at 9:45.
Well, I'm looking it up too. So you go a little deeper. You know, sympathise is the word, and part of their definition
Feeling with
is to have compassion on. I think and that's the whole point of this chapter is you were young once too. Mm-hmm. You also are a sinner. It said that was Hebrews 4:14.
15.
4:15. So you're talking about your children not understanding them sometimes. Like Ian's my child and Chandler's Amy's child. So Amy would look at Ian and go, I don't understand why in the world. And I'm like, how do you not understand? I understand exactly. And then Chandler would do something and she'd understand exactly why. So she was much more lenient and sympathetic with Chandler, and I was much more sympathetic with Ian. And but it was because I was able to understand. So I mean, I think that understanding of a person is important, you know. And I think sometimes parents are afraid that if they discipline their children, that their children will think they don't love them. You know, that's a thing too. But I think, you know, if you love your children, that's the main thing. Actually, love your children and make sure you're training them to face a real world. So on page 125, last paragraph, he talks about Peter, the hall of Caiaphas, is Luke 22:61. And he says, Jesus looked across the courtyard directly at Peter. So this is after Peter, you know, the rooster crowed, he's denied him 3 times, and then their eyes meet. And then what he says here, Jesus looked directly at Peter with nothing but sorrow and love in his eyes. And it's like, okay, the text does not say that. Is this where you had your problem with it, Christian?
This is part of it.
Okay. So the text doesn't say that. And so I was listening to Martin Lloyd-Jones preach one time, and he preached on this text, and he said Jesus looked on him with firm indignation, and I can't remember what else. I don't know if he said anger, but it was with great, terrible disapproval and judgment. And I thought, there's no way that he's looking at Peter with compassionate understanding. It's like, man, you're about to go through, I knew it. I knew what you're about to go through. And I hate this for you, but you've got to go through it. And I think I had this theory that if you ask a Christian, you get them to read this and say, what do you think the look on Jesus' face was? And that tells you a lot about what they think about the grace of God. And I think Martin Lloyd-Jones could have a little bit of a problem sometimes with the way grace is extended to people if he believes that Jesus looked at Peter and when Peter was about to recognize his sin and just look at him with a condemning look.
Especially considering what he was getting ready to do.
Yeah, I'm about to die for that sin. It's good. Mm-hmm.
We don't have time for my problems right now. This is not a therapy session. But like, I got issues when you make a big point out of something that's not in the text, or even can easily be extrapolated from the text. For instance, when he says that the other disciple let Peter go in as a sign of respect into the tomb, doesn't say that. I heard somebody preach an entire sermon, and the crux of their sermon was that Peter got outrun because he was slowed down by his guilt. Like, let's just make stuff up.
Yeah. Yeah, when I read that, I was like, yeah, I wish it had hit me a little harder now that the way you say it. But it's like, my first thought was, I'm not sure that's what. It almost seems like, man, you want to elevate Peter and make him the first pope. It's like there's a lot of stuff. It made me start thinking, it's like, okay, wait a minute. And that's not what Beeke does at all.
No.
I do think what happens with people over time, I mean, goodness, if he were on here, I just have to be quiet and listen. I see it with his exegesis. But I think not speaking about him, but some people, sometimes ourselves included, you get these things in your mind about the way something works, and then you just sort of, you think that's the way. I don't know. So yeah, I agree. I don't think John let Peter in. It doesn't say that anywhere. Like, why did? If anything, I've always, the way it obviously was. I mean, in my mind, when I was watching it, was in my mind, it's like they're both running and they're getting there. And John gets there, and John's just like, and Peter just busts in.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing? That's the way Peter always was. He just blew past him, not because of anything other than that's how he was. Where John was more contemplative. I mean, yeah, I don't know. So anyway, yeah, I agree. It's just, there's no reason to make a strong point from something that's not really given in the text. Kevin did say it at one point. He says he disciplined those he loves, of course. Yeah. So that's what we have to. That's why we are disciplining our kids.
It's actually hateful to not discipline your kids.
Right. Yeah, you're an illegitimate son. If you're not being disciplined by the Lord, you're an illegitimate son, he says. Let's see. So yeah, it's got it. Okay, page 127, and it's under this Peter placed first thing. But he says, if you do paragraphs, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it says, as parents, we understand the difficulty of dealing with children whose pride has become so inflated it needs to be squelched. And my thing is, typically that's because parents have puffed their children up so much that why would they not be prideful? Because they're perfect in every way. You remember that song? Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way. You ever heard that? So I think children are taught. He says, disciplining a child is tough. Yet when our children act as if the world revolves around them, we must speak to them with priestly sympathy about their need for humility. And I'm like, well, there's a lot of parents that need to be spoken to with priestly humility. Say, quit puffing up your children so much. You're making I think parents feel like it's their job sometimes to make their child, they want to make them prideful. They want to make them strong. They want to make them courageous. They want to make them, what's the word I'm looking for? They want to encourage them in lots of different ways. But you can do that in a way that is like very
healthy.
You can do it in a very healthy way, but you can also do it in an unhealthy way. You can do it. Wes said, "Step out a second." You can do it in a way that just does nothing but puff that kid up. Some parents' worlds revolve around their children. That's what I was going to say, and that is very unhealthy.
And all that does is reinforce the idea that the world revolves around the kids.
Yeah, I mean, and why would I not think the world revolves around me when my family's world revolves around me?
When it appears to.
I mean, have you ever been chastised by a parent who thinks you're not treating their child with enough pride, with enough, what's the word I'm looking for, that you aren't making enough of their children?
No, maybe I should try harder though.
You should try harder at that, because I mean, apparently I do that.
That is
Kevin said, I
definitely
remind myself
a
often
goal.
that the shepherd carried a staff as well as a rod. Amen. And I mean, I don't know. Some of that could just be a lot of the taekwondo stuff and dealing with kids a lot, where it's just, if parents who didn't have a very good childhood can live out their childhood through their children, especially if their children are exceptionally good at something, very smart, very athletic, very whatever. And then you just want to encourage that, but you also have to make sure they just know, sometimes you're not the best at everything, and that's okay. And maybe sometimes winning the game is not the best thing to do at this particular moment. It's hard lessons to learn, because a lot of parents haven't necessarily learned these as well. Talks about God hating pride. What can we do to help you conquer that pride and walk humbly with our God? It's the kind of sentence I want to have come out of my mouth with Christian. Hey, what can I do to help you conquer this pride? Can I do that?
Yeah. It's so good.
I'm here for you, but I think a lot of it, if you do that, but at the same time, it's like, but man, I get it, because I have that same problem too. Or I have this, and maybe you can even talk to your child sometimes and say, help me to understand. But I don't know. You're talking about like a 4-year-old. He doesn't understand either. He don't know. Why'd you freak out like that? I don't know. Help me to help you.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, they don't know.
Yeah.
They don't know why they've lost their mind. Like, because you served their meal on a different plate than what they wanted.
Yeah. I mean, when you were 4 years old, how'd you handle it? I mean, how did you
intellectually? I sat down and talked it out with my parents.
Sure, you did.
Very rational. Had a good discussion.
Well, we had like Curious George books. Mine was always like, okay, that straightened me out.
With the book itself.
Yeah.
Hardback.
Let's see. He does say, page 128, Peter's example teaches us that when a sinner is humbled and truly repents, fellow believers are to receive him back into fellowship and love. Likewise, when our children are humbled and repent of sin, we are to confirm their repentance with unchanged love and thanksgiving to God. So yeah, holding grudges with the children. Yeah, did you want to say something?
I can't finish, but I do want to say something here.
That's pretty much it. I mean, I just want, there is restoration. And that's one of the major things of the Christian faith is, reconciliation and restoration of relationship.
This was something that, it was something that when we first were becoming parents, in dealing with discipline issues, that was something that that Andrea emphasized in it, and it rubbed off on me in a big way. Was when we go and we have a moment of discipline, like that's not over until restoration has occurred. And so if you punch your brother in the face and now your fellowship is broken, this isn't over until you guys have been restored. If I have to take a child and discipline that kid, then we're not moving on. Like, we're not going back to out of the private until we've been restored. And that usually looks like some hugging it out,
I
telling,
saw a good thing.
I love you, like,
Yeah.
and being able to, okay, well, let's go. And then that's it. Like, once you walk out,
Yeah.
you're not talking about that anymore.
Well, it's like
Ideally.
we had Bear, our 3-year-old, just turned 3-year-old, was over at the house, and we've got this little candy cane that's almost as tall as he is. Christmas decoration that's still, today's the last day of Epiphany. You can still have it out, and so he's walking around. He loves this candy cane. He comes over here, it's great, and Christian there playing around and stuff, and he just whacks Christian with this candy cane. And his mom says, "That's not a weapon." I was like, "It's not like a weapon. I think he's got a weapon." But she said, "You don't do that. You apologize to him. You say you're sorry or something." And then Bear looked at him and he says, "I apologize." For a 3-year-old, I was like, "Okay, they've been teaching this child. I apologize." And then Christian looks at him and he says, "That's okay. I forgive you."
Nice.
And I was like, "Oh, that was so good." I'm not even sure I taught him that, but I want to take credit. But it's like, because it's not just saying it's okay, because it's not okay that you keep hitting me. You need to know it's not okay, but it's okay. But I forgive you is and what we should ask for is forgiveness. But that's at reconciliation. So when I saw him say, "I forgive you," and then they went on act like nothing happened because there was restoration. So that's good to actually intentionalize that type of thing when you see that conflict between brothers and sisters. Kevin's in there with us tonight. Discipline is incomplete until restoration has occurred. Well, yeah, he's got a good. He's not reformed, but he's got the best reformed beard you ever saw. Discipline is incomplete until restoration has occurred. I like that idea. Absolutely, yeah. And so, and we have a ministry of reconciliation. That's talking about martial arts tonight. So there was a book that I had on martial arts, and the whole thing was, the idea was martial arts is the art of reconciliation. And I thought, okay, this is good. It's like, because if you're in a conflict, and so we've been trained, disciplined in our culture today to think of martial arts as mixed martial arts, where you go in there and you just beat somebody into submission. But the martial arts is supposed to be somebody's trying to attack you, somebody's trying to get you, somebody's trying to hurt you. What you want to do is I want this conflict reconciled. But once I get in my mind, I'm going to dominate this other person, I've already lost. And so, if I'm trying to dominate you in anything, it's like I need to be able to seek reconciliation. And that doesn't mean to agree with sin. It doesn't mean I let you, chop my arm off. It doesn't mean any of these things, but it means my ultimate goal, is to seek reconciliation, because we have a ministry of reconciliation with our God, who is holy and just and good. And in Jesus Christ, we have been reconciled with him, and been reconciled before our sanctification has been completed. We are in a process of being discipled. So the Great Commission is not, I said this Sunday, is not about making converts. It's about making disciples. You baptize them in order to bring them in, to disciple them, in order to teach. And that's what, I'm grateful that God is not as harsh with me as I am with my children. And then when I pray the prayer, "Forgive me my debts as I forgive my debtors," I'm like, okay. Help me to be more compassionate. Help me. I want to be a better discipler. I want to be a better discipliner. I want to have more self-control, so that when my children or anybody else in my life is driving me to distraction, I can deal with it without having to apologize about how I dealt with it later.
That's good.
I'm in a talkative mood.
I think we all
did great. Yeah, that's me.
God can't. So page 129, God alone can accomplish such change in our children. However, we as parents must model godly behavior. So Wes talked about that before. How do you get them to, something about how do you make them change? How do you get them to change? How do you do it? And it's just like you're talking your own God level stuff. God's working out his plan through us to, so we have to depend on him. And then let's see, the very last page. When we are 90 years old and our children are in their 60s, they will still belong to us. Reflecting on the Savior's loving sympathy, we will still be touched with the feeling of their infirmities. We will weep with them in their sorrows and rejoice with them in their joys. We will love them to the end. And that's really a good thing. I just think the whole thing with Jesus is our high priest who was tempted in every way yet without sin is able to. We do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses. So then we're able to we can go boldly to a throne of grace. I mean, that's the cool thing. And we want our children to be able to come boldly to us with their weaknesses and infirmities. And it's a challenge. So, but I think keeping in mind, I mean, you have a responsibility to discipline your kids, but don't judge other people by how they seem to be doing with their children, by their children's behavior, because you don't know what they're dealing with. C.S. Lewis talks about Christians should be the most glorious people that you see anywhere. And he says, you have this one old lady, two old women, and the one old woman is like the nicest woman you ever want to know. She gives you candy. She's sweet to you all the time. The other one's just kind of crotchety and grumpy. And you find out later the crotchety, grumpy one is saved and the little nice old lady is not. And you're like, how can this be? And he says, because you don't know how beautiful this woman would be with Christ. And you don't know how bad that woman would be without him. You just need to not be quite so judgmental, be a little more compassionate, and be a little ready to give a little more grace to help people to get along to where, that's how we want to be treated. So you treat other people the way you want to be treated. All right. Closing words from you guys.
I'm just sitting on go with 1 Samuel 9:8.
Oh, our 9:8 passages. All right. Well, Wes, do you have anything you want to add or
doesn't
anything
have
from
9
the
chapters.
Oh.
Yes, I missed last week, and I hate that because it was I probably enjoyed last week's chapter a little better than this one, reading it earlier, but it hit me pretty deep, and it was kind of, coming to the throne of grace and, with consistency day after day after day, even if you're praying the same prayer over your child every night. And a lot of days, that's where I feel like I am. But kind of bleeding into this chapter, being sympathetic with our children, it amazes me how much of this stuff can be impacted in our family worship time. So even say it's been a day of just constant correction, say reconciliation, Christian, has not yet occurred. How you deem it should have been. I found family worship when everybody's in the room together, and you finish up your reading time, your scripture time, and you go into a time of prayer. Man, it's just so important. Even if I'm coming to God on behalf of my children, confessing my sin, our sin, the sins that have taken place that day, through faith, I pray that our children will always remember that. And it will be impacting them day after day after day with consistency. And, that's kind of where we are, because, with 4-year-olds and obviously Abby being one, we just, we have to have faith that God's moving in their hearts, and we are being sympathetic and just. And I think those two do tie together. I think, things we've been through in the past cause us to be sympathetic as we see our children doing similar things. And the way we are just in that situation is taking them to the Bible, right? You take them to the Bible, and justice is done, and God works on their hearts through that. And so I think they do tie together. But it's good talk. Appreciate you guys. A lot of good stuff there. Good night.
That was very, very well said. All right, so what's our verse for tonight? The 9:8, next 9:8. There's not one in Ruth.
Yeah, so 1 Samuel 9:8. The servant answered Saul again, "Here I have with me a quarter of a shekel of silver, and I will give it to the man of God to tell us our way."
Can you interpret that for us real quick, Pastor Black?
What's a shekel?
money.
Well, I know that, but I mean, is it like a lot of money?
I don't think so.
Oh, well, that's no good then. I was hoping maybe, you can start implementing that when you go to visit people. Give me a shekel, I'll tell you a way. A shekel of silver. That's interesting. All right. Well, thank you guys. And I'll be praying for you and your families, and y'all pray for me and mine. And you're doing good. Just keep going.
Thank you, sir.
All
Thank
right.
y'all.